The morning air was crisp with frost, and the sun had barely risen over the jagged peaks of the northern capital when Lady Yelan Huai stood silently at the edge of the palace courtyard. The clatter of guards' boots against stone echoed like distant thunder, each step a grim reminder that nothing in this world came without a price. 20 years ago, on a day much like this, she had stood in the same courtyard, her heart pounding against her chest, while the life of her family slipped through her fingers like sand. Her parents, the Huai family of the Western Fief, had been accused of treason, their heads set to fall under the decree of the court. She had been their daughter, their only heir, yet also their betrayer. It was a necessary cruelty. Her parents, intoxicated with ambition and fear, had sought to sell her into a marriage that would have chained her to a man devoid of honor, a man who would have crushed her spirit beneath gilded oppression. Her revelation of their plots had been precise, calculated, yet in that moment, she had not felt pride. Only a hollow, gnawing emptiness. The executioner's block was laid with brutal efficiency, a slab of polished oak that gleamed even under the pale sunlight. Minister Lien Wei, her fiancé then, had stood beside her, not with pity or hesitation, but with an unwavering, cold admiration. His black robes shimmered with the authority of the court, his eyes sharp and unyielding, reflecting a mind that could parse strategy from emotion in a heartbeat. He had been the one to oversee the execution personally, and when the blade fell, slicing through the silence like lightning through the sky, he had simply nodded at her. Decisive, he had murmured, his voice carrying both approval and a subtle warning. Never let sentiment cloud judgment. You will survive in this world only if you learn to wield ruthlessness as a shield. Yelan remembered the taste of tears she had refused to shed. She had turned away from her parents' lifeless faces, from the crowd of nobles who had watched her transformation from a daughter into a weapon, and she had felt the weight of history pressing down upon her shoulders. That day, she had understood that love and loyalty were luxuries in a world ruled by ambition. She had also understood, with a clarity that had never left her, that power demanded sacrifice and sometimes, the sharpest blade must cut closest to the heart. For years afterward, she had buried the memory beneath layers of steel and protocol, hiding her grief behind poised smiles and controlled anger. Lien Wei had praised her discipline and courage, but the admiration in his eyes had always carried a subtle shadow, a recognition that she had walked a line between morality and necessity few could even conceive. At 20, she had learned that survival required cold calculation, and at 25, she had learned that even love could become a weapon when wielded with precision. Yet, as she now stood on the balcony of her southern fief, the wind brushing against her cheeks, she realized that some blades, once drawn, never returned to their sheaths. The memory of her parents' faces haunted her still, not as accusation, but as a reminder that every choice carried consequences. Every decision she had made to survive, to rise, to protect herself, had been forged in fire and blood. And the fire had left scars deeper than any sword could cut. Yelan's mind drifted to Lien Wei, now a man of considerable power, his influence stretching across the capital like a shadow over the empire. She could still remember the way he had studied her then, evaluating not just her courage but her potential. There had been a subtle admiration in his gaze, tempered by caution, and in it, she had glimpsed a kindred spirit, someone who understood that the world demanded strategy, and that mercy was a dangerous indulgence. But admiration, she had learned, could be as treacherous as betrayal. Over the years, Lien Wei had become a symbol of the very world that had demanded her parents' deaths. The man she had once trusted with her heart, the man who had taught her that survival meant embracing the darkness within, had also become the embodiment of the forces that now threatened to undo everything she had fought to build. Yelan closed her eyes, letting the memory of that day wash over her. She remembered the final moments before the execution, the hollow echo of her father's voice, trembling yet defiant. Yelan, remember who you are. Never forget the Huai blood runs in your veins. And she had remembered. Every choice she had made since then had been shaped by that command, every action a continuation of the legacy she had inherited, the legacy of survival, of cunning, and of retribution. She had become a master of strategy, a force to be reckoned with in the intricate dance of court politics and martial power. But no amount of skill could erase the pain of the day her parents died, nor the knowledge that Lien Wei had been the one to carry out their execution. The courtyard below was empty now, the morning ceremony long concluded, yet the echo of the past lingered like a shadow. Yelan's hand instinctively brushed the hilt of the blade she always carried at her side, a gift from her father before his death, and a symbol of her enduring resolve. It was a simple weapon, elegant and unassuming, but she had honed it to a point where it could end life as decisively as her memory of that fateful morning. She thought of the years ahead, of the empire's endless cycles of power and betrayal. The court would never forget her past, nor would they forgive her for the decisions she had made to survive. But Yelan Huai was no longer the frightened girl who had watched her parents die. She had become a force capable of shaping destiny itself. And yet, as the wind tugged at her robes and the first light of dawn painted the palace in pale gold, she allowed herself one moment of vulnerability. For all her cunning, for all her calculated ruthlessness, she missed the family she had lost. She missed the warmth of a father's embrace, the quiet wisdom of a mother's counsel, the laughter that had once filled the halls of the Huai estate. But she also knew that in this world, longing was a luxury, and survival demanded the absence of it. A soft voice broke her reverie. "Mistress Yelan?" It was her loyal aide, a young woman named Fen, whose quiet presence had been a constant through Yelan's rise. "Are you well?" Yelan opened her eyes, meeting Fen's concerned gaze. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "I am," she said, her voice steady, though a shadow of pain lingered beneath it. "The past has its place. But it does not rule me." Fen hesitated, sensing the depth of the unspoken emotions that Yelan carried like armor. "And Lian Wei?" she asked cautiously. Yelan's lips curved in a faint, knowing smile, bitter yet resolute. "He is a necessary part of the past," she replied. "But the future, our future, is mine to shape." As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the courtyard, Yelan Huai turned from the memory that had defined her life and faced the path ahead. Every choice, every maneuver, every blade she drew would honor her parents' memory not through vengeance alone, but through mastery, strategy, and the unwavering will to survive. The past had forged her, the present demanded her cunning, and the future awaited her command. And so, with the first light of dawn bathing her in gold, Yelan Huai stepped forward, the weight of history heavy on her shoulders, yet the fire of determination burning brightly in her chest. The morning after Li Jun's wedding was quiet, unnaturally so, as if the entire capital held its breath in anticipation. The grand hall of the Lian estate, which had only yesterday reverberated with laughter, music, and the clatter of wedding festivities, now seemed hollow. The silk banners that draped the walls hung limp, and the scent of incense lingered like a memory of joy long past. Lady Yelan Huai rose from the low divan where she had spent a sleepless night replaying the events of the wedding. Her hands, delicate yet calloused from years of practice with both brush and blade, clenched around a cup of tea. Steam rose in thin, curling wisps, carrying the bitter aroma into the cold morning air. She had poured herself a drink not out of thirst, but to occupy her hands, to give her mind a task while she gathered her thoughts. The door opened silently, and Lian Wei entered. He moved with the composure of a man who commanded both respect and fear, his expression serene, almost disarmingly so. There was no flourish, no dramatic entry. Just a man, his posture impeccably straight, his dark eyes steady, and the faintest trace of fatigue under the sharp line of his brow. "Yelan," he said softly, his voice carrying a calm that contrasted sharply with the storm she felt roiling inside her. "We need to discuss something." She set the cup down, eyes narrowing slightly. "Discuss what, Wei?" Her tone was polite but edged with caution, because she had learned long ago that every word from him carried weight, and not always in ways that benefited her. "I want a divorce," he stated simply, as though asking for a cup of tea rather than dissolving the most intricate of bonds. For a heartbeat, she felt the room tilt. The words seemed almost to hang in the air, waiting for some unseen mechanism to snap them into reality. She blinked slowly, processing. The court, she knew, would expect fury, a dramatic outburst. They would anticipate that she, Lady Yelan Huai, known for her sharp tongue and sharper strategies, would unleash a storm of emotion that would shake the city. But she did not. Not immediately. Instead, a strange, serene clarity washed over her. She had always known that her marriage to Lian Wei was as much a political alliance as a union of hearts. The wedding of their son had not just celebrated love, it had been a delicate maneuver, a signal to the capital, to the nobles, to the crown prince Lang himself, that the Lian family's power and loyalty were secure. And now, that balance had shifted. The emperor was ill. His presence at court had diminished, leaving a vacuum of authority. And the reigning crown prince, Lang, favored civil officials like Lian Wei, distrusted military families like hers, and was already angling to consolidate power. Yelan understood perfectly that Wei's request was not born of impulsive resentment or personal whim, it was a reflection of the changing tides of politics. "Very well," she said finally, her voice calm, measured, and unwavering. If that is your wish, we shall proceed. There is no need for conflict. Lian Wei's gaze flickered, just for a moment, as if surprised by her composure. He inclined his head slightly. I thought you would resist. Yelan allowed herself a faint smile, bittersweet and knowing. Resistance would serve no purpose. The winds have shifted, and I am a sailor, not a stone. The court would whisper of her calm demeanor, interpreting it as coldness or cruelty. But in truth, her mind was a storm of calculations, of plans weaving silently in the shadows. She had already begun to consider the steps necessary to safeguard her children, her fief, and the fragile threads of her own future. A calm acceptance, she knew, was often more powerful than a display of rage. Lian Wei approached, hands clasped behind his back. Yelan, I want the divorce formalized immediately, he said. The children. I wish for them to go with you. The words struck her with a mix of surprise and sorrow. He had always been meticulous, precise, controlled, but never, until now, had he expressed a willingness to relinquish their children. Her heart tightened, a pang she had buried beneath years of strategy and discipline. She remembered the boy, Li Jun, with his sharp eyes and mischievous grin, and the girl, Li Mei, whose laughter had once echoed through the halls of their home. And yet, she did not falter. You will find no resistance here, she said softly, almost to herself. But understand this, I will not be passive. I will protect them, and nothing else matters. He inclined his head, a faint trace of relief crossing his features. I trust your judgment. You always have. The calmness of the moment belied the tension that simmered beneath it. Yelan could feel the undercurrent of the court's reaction even from this distant southern fief she had envisioned returning to. Rumors would swirl. Nobles would whisper that the Lian household was fractured, that their unity had dissolved like mist under the sun. And yet, the truth was far more nuanced. The divorce was not the end of a bond but the reconfiguration of a strategy, a reshaping of alliances in the ever-shifting sands of power. She thought of her fief in the south, a place bathed in warmth and sunlight, in contrast to the cold precision of the capital. Returning there would allow her to regroup, to prepare for the moves she could already see forming on the chessboard of empire. She would protect her children, secure their futures, and, if necessary, exact measures to ensure their survival. You leave the capital? Lian Wei asked, his voice careful, almost hesitant. I do, Yelan replied, her gaze distant, set on the horizon beyond the palace walls. It is time I returned home, to the land where I am strongest, where I can act without the eyes of 1,000 courtiers upon me. He studied her, his eyes reflecting a complicated mixture of respect, admiration, and something she could not quite name. For a moment, the past her parents' execution, the trials they had endured together, the subtle intimacies of shared survival hung between them like a fragile thread. Then he nodded, severing the silence with finality. I will prepare the arrangements, he said. You have always been decisive, Yelan. I trust you will act with the same wisdom now. Yelan smiled faintly, the edge of steel beneath her grace shining through. Wisdom, yes. But also caution. One must never forget that the smallest misstep can cost more than just a life, it can cost everything. As he left, she allowed herself a long, slow exhale. The calmness of her exterior belied the whirlpool inside. The divorce was not merely a legal formality. It was a declaration, a statement of intent. She would leave the capital, but she would not retreat. She would return stronger, sharper, and fully aware that the game of survival and power had only just begun. And as the sun rose higher, bathing the grand hall in soft golden light, Yelan Hui made her decision. She would go south, to her fief, but she would also set the wheels of strategy in motion. For in a world where loyalty was fleeting and power was everything, even calm acceptance could be the deadliest weapon of all. The carriage rumbled over the cobblestones of the capital, dust rising in muted clouds as it carried Yelan Hui and her children away from the only home Li Jun and Li Mei had ever known. Behind them, the capital gleamed with imperial authority and intrigue, but the walls of her former life felt suffocating now, and she welcomed the embrace of the open road. Yet her thoughts kept drifting back to the confrontation that had brought them to this point, a confrontation that had cracked the carefully constructed armor of her marriage. It had started with the simplicity of words, Lian Wei's request for a divorce delivered with calm precision, almost as if it were a mere administrative formality. But the court had misjudged Yelan, expecting rage or a scandalous display, and she had given them none. They did not see the storm quietly gathering behind her steady gaze. When she met him again later that afternoon, in the private chambers of the Lian estate, it was no longer calm. "Do you understand what you are asking?" she had demanded, her voice sharper than steel tempered in fire. "Do you know what it means to sever this bond?" He had merely looked at her, eyes steady, lips pressed in that same unwavering line she had loved and feared. "I do. And yet, I am asking anyway." Yelan's hands had clenched into fists, her nails pressing into her palms until the skin had blanched white. She had remembered the first time they had met, 20 years ago, both young, ambitious, and unafraid of the world. She had trusted him once, confided in him, believed in the shared understanding that survival demanded sacrifice. And now he was telling her that all of it, the love, the battles, the quiet support, was expendable. Anger surged, raw and bitter. "You speak as though I am the enemy, Wei. You throw our history in my face as if it were nothing." He had tilted his head, almost amused, almost indifferent. "Your past," he said, voice low and deliberate, "is what made you who you are. But it is also why you must leave. You are dangerous to the balance of the capital. And I will not stand in the way of what the Emperor's court requires." Dangerous. The word cut deeper than any blade ever could. He had called her dangerous, and she realized that he was right. She had become a force that could topple allies and enemies alike, a weapon in her own right. But it was the way he had distanced himself, the way he had reduced their shared life to a political calculation, that ignited a fire within her she had not felt in years. "You dare call me dangerous," she had snapped, stepping forward so close that he could smell the faint trace of jasmine and gunpowder on her robes, "when you were the executioner who praised me for betraying my own parents? When you celebrated my ruthlessness as if it were a virtue? You are no hero, Wei. You stood by while I sacrificed everything, while I survived in a world that would have devoured me." For a heartbeat, his composure faltered. She saw it in the slight twitch of his jaw, the shadow crossing his eyes, but it was gone as quickly as it came. "I was your partner," he said softly, almost mournfully. "I did what was required. And I did it with you." Yelan laughed bitterly, a sound that echoed harshly in the cold chamber. "A partner? You were the sword. The one who carried out the act. You dare speak of partnership when you held the blade?" The confrontation spiraled, each accusation a flare in the night sky, illuminating the truths they had buried and the resentments that had festered over decades. She felt her heart breaking not because of anger alone, but because of the grief of realizing that the man she had trusted, perhaps loved, had become the instrument of her isolation. Then came the final, shattering blow. He spoke with measured calm that made the words all the more devastating. "I want nothing of yours, Yelan. And as for the children," his gaze softened, almost unbearably, "they go with you. I will build a new life. A new family." For a moment, the room spun. Her chest tightened, the weight of betrayal and relief entwined in a painful knot. He was relinquishing the children, yes, but not out of love or duty. It was convenience, a calculated withdrawal. Yet, despite the bitter taste in her mouth, Yelan felt a sliver of gratitude, fierce and fleeting. She would take them with her, and she would protect them with everything she had. Her voice, when she spoke, was quiet but unyielding. "Then this ends here. I leave, and I take the only thing that truly matters. You may keep your schemes, your ambitions, and your new life, Wei. But I will take my children, and nothing else. Nothing." He inclined his head, respect mingling with regret in his expression. "So be it. You have always been strong, Yelan. Never forget that." And with that, the final threads of their union were severed. Yelan Huai left the chamber with Li Jun and Li Mei at her side, the children unaware of the storm they had just survived but sensing, in some instinctive way, that the world had shifted around them. She wrapped them in her presence like armor, shielding them from the harshness of a capital that would not wait for their grief. As the carriage carried them southward, Yelan allowed herself a private moment of reflection. Her hands rested lightly on the hilt of her blade, her mind already racing through the steps she would take to secure her children's future. The southern fief awaited, a land of warmth and opportunity, a place where she could act without the prying eyes of courtiers and politicians. But she knew, as she always had, that safety was temporary and power fleeting. Every move had consequences, and inaction could be as deadly as a blade in the wrong hands. Her gaze fell on Li Jun, his dark eyes alert and thoughtful beyond his years. He had inherited more than her cunning, he had inherited her resolve. And Li Mei, with her gentle curiosity and quick intelligence, would need her guidance and protection as the tides of politics shifted around them. Yelan Huai, once the obedient daughter of the Huai family, once the dutiful wife of Lian Wei, was now something else entirely. She was a mother, a strategist, and a survivor. And as the capital receded behind them, she allowed a fleeting smile to cross her lips, a smile that was equal parts sorrow and defiance. The road ahead would be treacherous. She would need allies, schemes, and every ounce of her indomitable will. But she had survived before. She would survive again. And this time, she would ensure that the mistakes of the past, the sacrifices, the betrayals, the compromises would serve not as chains, but as the foundation for a power that was hers alone to wield. As the carriage rolled into the horizon, carrying them toward the warmth of the south, Yelan Huai made a silent vow. She would protect her children. She would reclaim her life. And she would return to the capital, not as a wife bound by history, but as a force no one could ignore, a woman whose decisions, like the blade at her side, were precise, deadly, and irrevocable. The southern fief welcomed Yelan Huai like an old friend, though its warmth did little to ease the storm within her. The rolling hills, fragrant with blossoming osmanthus, and the wide rivers reflecting golden sunlight, were a stark contrast to the cold precision of the capital. Here, the world moved at a gentler pace, and yet, to Yelan, every calm day was a canvas upon which she must paint her strategies with careful precision. Li Jun rode beside her as they entered the gates of the Huai estate, his posture tense, his dark eyes scanning the bustling courtyard. He had inherited her sharp instincts, the keen awareness of the subtle threats that lurked beneath every gesture and word. Behind him, Li Mei clutched the folds of her travel gown, excitement and apprehension dancing across her delicate features. The children had survived the upheaval of their father's betrayal and the sudden departure from the capital, but Yelan knew that survival alone would not be enough in the coming days. They needed preparation, foresight, and cunning. The estate itself had been prepared meticulously in her absence. Servants and guards, loyal to her bloodline and her legacy, bowed as she passed. The halls were fragrant with the scent of jasmine and sandalwood, and the courtyards were alive with the quiet murmur of labor and life. Yet Yelan noticed every detail, the placement of guards, the routes to the river, the hidden vantage points, and her mind mapped every possibility, every contingency, as she had learned to do all her life. "Mother," Li Jun asked cautiously as they settled in the main hall, "what now? Do we stay here quietly?" Yelan's eyes softened, but her tone was measured. "Quiet is a luxury we cannot afford, Jun. The capital has changed, and those who think themselves secure are often the easiest targets." Li Mei tilted her head, confusion knitting her delicate brow. "Targets, mother? Who would want to hurt us?" Yelan smiled faintly, the shadow of a plan forming in her mind. "Not us directly. But power is like a river, Mei. It shifts, and when it shifts, it can sweep away everything in its path. Your father may have abandoned his responsibilities here, but we will not be powerless." That evening, the first steps of her plan began to take shape. Yelan summoned the leaders of the local nobility and military officers loyal to her family. They arrived cautiously, aware that the return of Lady Yelan Huai signaled not just a homecoming, but the stirring of ambitions and rivalries that had long lain dormant. "I have returned," she said, her voice calm but commanding, "because the tides are changing in the capital, and we cannot rely on the whims of distant princes or ministers. We must secure ourselves, and we must do it now." Heads nodded, some with reverence, others with subtle skepticism. Yelan knew this. She expected doubt. She also expected loyalty to be tested. But she had always thrived under scrutiny. She laid out her first scheme, Li Mei's sudden, seemingly impulsive marriage to a young nobleman named Wen Ji, a match that was carefully calculated. Li Jun frowned. "Mother, why so quickly? She just arrived. Is this necessary?" Yelan's gaze met his, sharp yet gentle. "Jun, the crown prince Lang is insecure and ambitious. He will try to consolidate power through those around him. One way he does this is by seeking alliances through marriage, even targeting your sister. By marrying her to Wen Ji now, we remove the possibility of her becoming a pawn in the crown prince's schemes." Li Mei's eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and relief flashing across her face. She trusted her mother implicitly, yet the suddenness of the arrangement left her reeling. Yelan placed a firm hand on her shoulder, a silent reassurance that she would always guide and protect them. "Mother, what about the others?" "What about?" Li Jun hesitated, the question hanging between them. "The others will come," Yelan replied, her mind already shifting to the next step. June, there is a man in the capital, Duke Wang. He is one of the Crown Prince's main supporters. He is influential, loyal to Lang, and therefore dangerous to us. I need you to strike at him. June's dark eyes widened. Strike? Mother, you mean, assassinate? Yelan nodded. Her expression was calm, almost serene, but beneath it lay the weight of necessity. Yes, June. You must act swiftly, decisively, and secretly. His influence will only grow if we wait. If we remove him from the equation, the Crown Prince's reach diminishes. June swallowed hard, the weight of responsibility settling on his young shoulders. He had inherited her decisiveness and her tactical mind, yet the morality of killing, even for the sake of survival, was a burden he had not yet carried. And if I fail? He whispered, his voice tight. Yelan's hand rested briefly on his shoulder. Then we adapt. But you will not fail. You are ready. You have the training, the mind, and the resolve. She saw in their faces the mixture of fear and trust, and she allowed herself a brief moment of vulnerability. Her children were growing into their roles, shaping themselves in a world where survival was measured in blood, wit, and courage. And though she had faced such decisions before, guiding them through their first real brush with life and death was a challenge she had not anticipated. The night deepened, and Yelan Huai walked alone through the courtyard. The moonlight gleamed on the polished stone, casting long shadows that twisted and bent with every flicker of lantern light. She imagined the moves on the imperial chessboard, each figure from the Crown Prince to her estranged husband Lian Wei positioned in a pattern she could manipulate. June and Mei must remain safe, she whispered to herself, her breath forming small clouds in the chilly night air. And we must strike before they even realize what is happening. Her thoughts returned to Lian Wei, and she allowed herself the briefest flicker of anger. He had handed her the freedom she now wielded like a weapon, but he had also abandoned his post as protector and father, leaving her to shoulder the burdens of vengeance, strategy, and survival alone. It stung, yet it also hardened her resolve. She would no longer rely on anyone else to act on her behalf. She alone would chart the course. In the following weeks, Yelan orchestrated the whirlwind of activity necessary to bring her plans into motion. Invitations to the marriage feast for Li Mei were sent with careful discretion, disguising political intent as celebration. Spies and informants were subtly guided into positions that would yield information about the Crown Prince's movements and the loyalties of his supporters. June trained in the art of stealth, archery, and patience, preparing himself to strike at Duke Wang with a precision that would make Yelan proud. And all the while, she observed, calculated, and adjusted. Every gesture, every whisper, every minor interaction in the fief was a test, a piece of information to be used in the greater game she was orchestrating. The southern fief, warm and seemingly serene, had become her laboratory, her fortress, and her arena. One evening, as the sun set over the rolling hills, casting the estate in a fiery glow, Yelan stood atop the veranda, watching her children play with the young nobles who had arrived for the feast. Her heart ached with love, pride, and fear all at once. They were the future, and she had placed them in the center of a storm that would not forgive weakness. Yet beneath the fear was a fierce certainty. She had survived betrayal, execution, and heartbreak. She had risen from the ashes of her family's tragedy to carve out power, and now she would protect and guide her children with the same relentless resolve that had carried her through every trial of her life. The game was just beginning. Night had fallen over the southern fief, draping the estate in a thick velvet darkness that seemed to swallow even the faintest whispers of wind. Lanterns glowed along the main avenues, casting flickering shadows on stone walls and manicured gardens, but the tranquility was an illusion carefully crafted. Yelan Huai moved silently across the veranda, her black robes blending with the night, her senses alert to every sound: the rustle of leaves, the distant cry of a night bird, the subtle clatter of footsteps along the outer perimeter. "Mother?" June's voice broke the silence, hesitant yet determined. He emerged from the shadows, bow in hand, eyes sharp beneath the lowered hood. "It is time?" Yelan's lips curved in a faint, approving smile. "It is. Remember what I have taught you, June. Precision, patience, and calm. Let your fear sharpen you, not freeze you." June nodded, swallowing hard. His heart raced, pounding like a drum in his chest. He had been trained for this moment for months: archery, stealth, infiltration, but this was the first time he would put theory into practice. The target was Duke Wang, the Crown Prince Lang's chief supporter in the capital, whose influence had now reached into the provinces through loyal vassals and emissaries. A single arrow, precisely placed, could tip the scales of power in the empire and perhaps ignite the first spark of chaos the capital would not see coming. June, focus, Yelan whispered. Do not underestimate the stakes. This is not just about Duke Wang, it is about sending a message. It is about strategy. You are not merely striking, you are shaping the game. June drew a deep breath, his fingers brushing the fletching of the arrow. He felt the weight of responsibility settle on him, a burden heavier than the bow he held. Yet beneath it was a spark of determination. He would not fail. He could not fail. For his mother. For his sister. For the future she had promised to carve out. The night air was cold, biting, yet invigorating. June crept through the gardens, following the pathways that Yelan had memorized and mapped for him. The estate's loyal guards had been positioned elsewhere, carefully diverted by small diversions: a tipped lantern, a sudden clatter of stones, and the careful placement of servants carrying trays. Every detail was accounted for, every step calculated to ensure that June reached the target without detection. Hours later, June arrived at the secluded tower where Duke Wang was staying. The shadows cloaked his approach, and he could see the faint glimmer of candlelight through the windows. His breath steady, his pulse a steady drumbeat in his ears, he notched the arrow, aiming carefully through a narrow opening. And then, just as he was about to release, a shadow moved across the courtyard below. Not a guard, not a servant, but someone familiar. June's grip tightened instinctively. The movement was deliberate, practiced, and, most importantly, skilled. It was someone of high capability, someone trained in deception and subtlety. He hesitated, sensing that the arrow's path had been tampered with. His eyes flicked to the fletching, and a cold realization settled in his chest. The arrow he had prepared, the one meticulously marked with the Huai family insignia, was no longer the one he had planned to use. Someone had replaced it. He drew back slightly, heart hammering, but there was no time for hesitation. The arrow flew, striking Duke Wang with lethal precision. The man fell silently, his last breath stolen by a weapon that carried a signature not of the Huai family, but of someone within the crown prince's inner circle. June's stomach churned. Mother, something is wrong, he whispered into the night, fear and confusion lacing his voice. This wasn't the arrow we prepared. Someone else has interfered. Yelan's eyes narrowed as she stepped from the shadows, her presence quiet yet commanding. She moved swiftly to his side, assessing the situation with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had survived more betrayals than most could imagine. Her mind raced, analyzing the possibilities, the implications, the players involved. June, she said, her voice calm but edged with steel, someone of great skill has orchestrated this. The arrow is a message. They want it to appear that the crown prince is not only capable but clever enough to strike without direct involvement. This is not mere coincidence. It is a conspiracy. June's hands trembled as he lowered his bow. Mother, who? Who could? Yelan's gaze darkened, sharp and discerning. It must be someone within the capital, someone with both skill and access. My first thought, Lian Wei. Her words were measured, deliberate, but the undercurrent of suspicion was palpable. And yet, it is not only him. Shadow Guard Commander Gao, your old ally, may be involved in the field. Someone is orchestrating events to make it appear that Duke Wang's death was part of the crown prince's plan, while hiding the true hand behind it. June's eyes widened. You mean, this is more than just a strike? It's political warfare? Yelan nodded. Exactly. And we have just been pulled into it. Someone wants us to act, but not to succeed. They want us to believe we are in control while the real manipulators move unseen. This is the Emperor's way of testing the crown prince, or perhaps of controlling him through chaos. The realization was sobering. The assassination, June's first act of independence and lethal precision, had become a piece in a much larger game. Every outcome would ripple through the empire, affecting not only their family but the balance of power across the capital. Yelan Huai placed a steady hand on her son's shoulder, feeling the tension in his body. Do not let fear paralyze you, June. This was your first step, and it was necessary. But from here on, we act with foresight, observation, and patience. We are not pawns, and we are not powerless. We are players. And every player must understand the board before making the next move. June exhaled, swallowing the fear and replacing it with determination. Mother. I understand. I will do as you say. I will learn. Yelan's lips curved in a faint, approving smile. Good. That is all I ask. Remember, June, skill is nothing without discernment. Today you struck. Tomorrow, we must see the hand that strikes with you, and ensure it bends to our design, not theirs. As the night deepened, Yelan Huai stood in the shadows of the southern fief, the cold air pressing against her skin. She traced the path of the arrow in her mind, the subtle nuances of its replacement, the invisible hands guiding events. She realized that her estranged husband Lian Wei, still in the capital, was likely already aware of the assassination. That Shadow Guard Commander Gao, her old ally in the field, may have been a conspirator, aligning with the Emperor's secret strategies. The situation was complex, layered, and dangerous. And yet, beneath the fear, beneath the uncertainty, a fierce fire burned within her. Every action, every movement, every piece on the imperial board was now part of her design. The assassination was not just an act of violence, it was the first visible thread of a tapestry that Yelan Huai intended to weave herself intricate, controlled, and deadly. Let them think they move the pieces, she whispered into the night, while we remain the hand that shapes the game. In that quiet darkness, mother and son returned to the estate, the weight of the night heavy upon them. June's first strike had been successful, yet its implications were far greater than either of them had anticipated. And Yelan knew, with a clarity born of decades of survival, that the path ahead would demand cunning, courage, and unflinching resolve. The game had begun, and the first arrow had flown, but the true battle was only just beginning. The capital was ablaze with rumors before the first light of dawn even touched the city walls. Word of Duke Wang's sudden and mysterious death had spread like wildfire, carried in whispers through the courtyards, along the marble corridors of the imperial palace, and into the opulent halls of ministers and nobles. The crown princess herself, daughter of Duke Wang, arrived at court the moment the news reached her ears, her face pale and drawn, her eyes alight with grief and fury. The accusation was immediate, explosive, and devastating. It was Prince Lang, she cried in the imperial hall, her voice echoing through the chamber, piercing the courtiers with the force of both sorrow and indignation. He has murdered my father to consolidate power. The court erupted into chaos. Ministers clutched at each other, their faces masks of shock and speculation. Gossip rippled like a tidal wave, swallowing decorum and precedence alike. Alliances, meticulously built over decades, trembled in the wind as courtiers scrambled to assess which side to claim or whether survival meant fleeing the storm entirely. Among the chaos, Lian Wei moved with the calm precision of a man accustomed to navigating treacherous waters. Yet even he could not prevent the fury of the crown princess from escalating matters beyond control. In a court where public perception was as lethal as any blade, the crown prince's closest ally had been struck down in a spectacle that could not be ignored. He could not merely act, he had to react. Before the day had ended, orders came down from the imperial palace. Lian Wei, Minister of Civil Affairs and a man known for his unflinching loyalty, was arrested on charges of complicity in Duke Wang's death. The arrest was swift, formal, and publicly denounced. The capital's populace, eager for scandal, whispered that even the most calculating men could not escape the wrath of an enraged crown prince. And yet, Yelan Huai, far to the south, remained serene. She had foreseen the storm, had predicted the chaos, and had anticipated Lian Wei's arrest not as an obstacle, but as a critical piece of the emperor's design. Sitting in the study of her southern estate, she traced the lines of strategy, her mind moving faster than any courtesan or minister in the capital. June, she said, her eyes scanning the maps and reports laid across the table, the assassination was not meant to empower us directly. It was meant to destabilize, to expose weaknesses. Your father's imprisonment is not failure, it is a calculated move by the emperor to pressure the crown prince. June frowned, tension etched into his youthful features. Mother, you mean father was always acting on someone else's orders? That this was part of the emperor's plan? Yelan's gaze was sharp, unflinching. Yes. Lian Wei has always been the emperor's deep cover agent, positioned to monitor and influence the crown prince from within. His loyalty lies not with Lang, but with the throne itself. That is why he did not resist when Lang accused him, nor did he act rashly. Every move is calculated, even imprisonment. June's mind reeled. So, the assassination, the chaos, it's all orchestrated? Yelan nodded. Partially. The emperor is ill, but his mind is far from weak. He understands that the crown prince is ambitious, impulsive, and insecure. By allowing Duke Wang's death to appear as Lang's doing, he isolates him, exposes his alliances, and tests the loyalty of those around him including Lian Wei. The gravity of the situation settled heavily on June. And the crown princess, she will not forgive easily. Her influence, her wrath, it could destabilize the court further. Precisely, Yelan replied. Her voice was calm, almost serene, but beneath it was the steel that had seen empires rise and fall. And that is why our moves must be precise. Every step we take, every ally we secure, every message we send must be deliberate. The crown prince is desperate, and desperation breeds mistakes. We will use that to our advantage. Meanwhile, back in the capital, the crown prince's desperation grew by the hour. Stripped of his most powerful supporter and confronted with the public outrage stirred by the crown princess, he lashed out with the only tool left to him, authority backed by fear. Ministers and courtiers watched in horror as Lian Wei, once untouchable and respected, was stripped of titles, accused of treason, and thrown into the imperial prison, his influence seemingly erased in a single stroke. And yet, Yelan knew better. From the south, she observed the unfolding chaos through her network of spies and loyal emissaries. Every act of the crown prince, every miscalculation, every desperate attempt to consolidate power only served to reinforce the strategy she and the emperor had unwittingly or perhaps deliberately set in motion. Her thoughts turned to her children. Li Mei, safe under the protection of her newly arranged marriage, was untouched by the chaos of the capital, shielded from the political maelstrom that threatened to engulf their family. Li Jun, despite his youth, had already learned the first lessons of strategy, consequence, and patience. They were both pieces on the board, but pieces she intended to move, rather than be moved. Yelan Huai allowed herself a rare moment of reflection, tracing the path of the empire in her mind, from the streets of the capital to the fields of her southern fief. The web of power was intricate, but she had survived worse than uncertainty. She had survived betrayal, loss, and heartbreak. She had endured because she understood the subtle dance between action and consequence, between loyalty and ambition. And now, with the crown prince exposed, the emperor subtly maneuvering his pieces, and her own family positioned for survival, Yelan felt the first stirrings of triumph, not of victory, but of control. The chaos in the capital was not an obstacle, it was an opportunity. Every move by Lang, every accusation, every act of desperation, could be anticipated, manipulated, and ultimately turned to her advantage. In the quiet of the southern estate, she whispered to herself, a vow carried as softly as the wind through the gardens, the crown prince believes he controls the board. He does not. Every step he takes is ours to predict, every misstep ours to exploit. We will endure. We will shape the outcome. And when the time comes, we will act. And so the night deepened, and the capital roiled in unrest, while Yelan Huai prepared her next move. The game had grown more dangerous, the stakes higher, and the players more desperate. But for the first time in years, she felt a profound clarity. She was no longer merely surviving. She was orchestrating the storm. The carriage rolled slowly through the gates of the capital, dust swirling in the cold morning air, carrying Yelan Huai and her children back into a city she had left with a heavy heart. Even from a distance, the capital seemed different, tenser, darker, and under a weight that only those attuned to politics could feel. Lanterns flickered in the early light, and the usual bustle of merchants and courtiers was subdued, as if the city itself sensed the gathering storm. Yelan's face was pale, though her eyes burned with the quiet fire of calculation. She had feigned severe travel sickness to the couriers sent to summon her, claiming that the long journey would be too taxing. In truth, she had prepared for every eventuality, every trap, every subtle attempt by Prince Lang to manipulate her. She had survived deception, betrayal, and death before, and she knew better than to let appearances dictate her strategy. Mother? Li Jun's voice trembled slightly from the corner of the carriage. Do you think it's safe? Coming back? Yelan's lips curved faintly. Safe, she murmured, her gaze narrowing toward the distant palace walls. No. But we will not find safety in hiding. Strategy requires presence, and presence requires courage. And courage, June, is often mistaken for recklessness by those who lack foresight. Li Mei clutched her mother's sleeve, the light of worry in her wide eyes. What if Prince Lang, what if he tries to hurt us? Yelan reached across the small gap, squeezing her daughter's hand with firm reassurance. He is desperate, and desperation is predictable. Watch and learn, Mei. Always observe before acting. The smallest detail can reveal the greatest weakness. The carriage passed through the city gates, escorted by imperial guards whose presence was perfunctory rather than protective. Yelan noted it immediately. The guards' movements were slightly off, too rigid, too rehearsed. Someone had tampered with their deployment, likely under Prince Lang's orders. But she did not panic. She had already accounted for contingencies, safe routes, and signals to communicate with loyal agents still hidden within the capital. When they arrived at the palace, Yelan's sharp eyes took in the scene at once. The grand gates, usually open and welcoming to those summoned by the emperor, were heavily guarded. Soldiers moved with an unnatural tension, and the usual bustle of servants and courtiers was absent. The courtyard, normally echoing with life, felt hollow, suffused with an oppressive quiet that made her pulse quicken. She stepped from the carriage, steadying herself against the familiar tremor of the city's undercurrent. "Remember," she said to her children, "stay close, observe, and do exactly as I instruct. The palace is not as it seems. We are walking into a snake's nest." The inner court was even more disorienting. Guards flanked every corridor, their expressions blank, and courtiers whispered in corners, casting furtive glances at one another. It was clear that Prince Lang had anticipated her return and moved swiftly to control the narrative. Then she saw them. The emperor, pale and frail, sat slumped in his ceremonial chair, barely able to lift his head. Beside him, Consort Lan, her face a mask of quiet suffering, and Prince Jian, tense and alert, were all confined within the inner sanctum. Even the normally imperious ministers and advisors were under close watch, some standing rigidly while others were forced to kneel. The air was thick with danger. Yelan's pulse quickened not from fear, but from the thrill of challenge. She had faced overwhelming odds before, and this was no different. Every detail mattered, and every misstep could cost lives. Prince Lang emerged from the shadows, his presence as cold and deliberate as the steel he carried in ambition. His smile was sharp, predatory. "So, the snake finally returns to the nest," he said, voice carrying through the hall. "How convenient that you have arrived just as the emperor's health fails. You could hardly be in a better position to witness your own helplessness." Yelan's eyes narrowed, but her voice was calm, carefully measured. "I am not here to witness, Prince Lang. I am here to ensure that nothing is lost to chaos, and that those who rely on loyalty and foresight are not crushed by recklessness." Lang's smile faltered for a brief instant, though only the keenest observer would notice. "Loyalty?" he scoffed. "Loyalty is a fragile thing, Lady Yelan. One wrong move, one moment of hesitation, and it shatters. You would do well to remember that. Even now, the Empire bends under my command." Yelan's gaze swept the room, noting every detail: the guards' positions, the routes of escape, the proximity of allies and enemies alike. She saw the faint tension in the emperor's frail frame, the worry etched into Consort Lan's face, and the barely restrained fury in Prince Jian's eyes. It was a room filled with potential chaos, a powder keg, and all it would take was the spark of strategy to ignite or extinguish it. "Prince Lang," she said softly, almost conversationally, "you overestimate yourself. Authority without wisdom is brittle. And desperation is the most predictable of all emotions." Lang's eyes narrowed. "Do not lecture me, snake. Every word you speak is noted, but words alone will not save those you care for." Yelan allowed a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Nor will fear. Observe closely, Lang. Strategy does not always roar. Sometimes, it waits, silent and inevitable." The tension was palpable. Every person in the room felt it, even those forced into silence by the prince's presence. The palace, usually a seat of absolute control, now felt like a trap closing in. And yet, Yelan moved through it with the confidence of a predator who understood the terrain, anticipating every step, every glance, every whispered plan. She could feel the emperor's gaze on her, faint but unwavering, a signal that he trusted her to act when the moment came. She felt the weight of that trust, heavy yet empowering. Every second that passed brought her closer to understanding the exact vulnerabilities in Prince Lang's control, and she knew that patience, observation, and precise timing would be her greatest weapons. Yelan Huai had returned to the capital not as a frightened daughter, nor as a compliant wife. She had returned as a strategist, a mother, a force that even the prince could not ignore. Every glance, every movement, every silent calculation was part of the game she intended to win. And though the palace was a snake's nest, she had long since learned how to dance among vipers without being bitten. The trap had been laid by Lang, but the predator now stood in its midst, silent, poised, and deadly. Yelan's mind traced the possibilities, the contingencies, the alliances waiting to be exploited. The game had begun, and this time, she would not merely survive. She would strike, and when she did, nothing would remain the same. The palace had become a cage. The air inside the inner sanctum was thick, heavy with tension, the mingling sense of incense, fear, and cold stone forming an invisible shroud over everyone present. Guards had been posted in every corridor, and the sound of their boots echoed like a metronome counting down to disaster. The emperor, frail and pale, slumped in his chair, barely able to raise his eyes. Consort Lan's hands clutched the folds of her robes, trembling but steadfast, while Prince Jian's gaze burned with quiet fury and unspoken restraint. And then there was Yelan Hui feigning sickness, her body trembling with the calculated appearance of weakness, her heart a steady drum of resolve. Prince Lang's entrance was deliberate, his every step measured to convey authority, his smile cruel, predatory. "So," he began, his voice ringing through the hall, "the legendary snake finally graces us with her presence. I must say, your timing is impeccable, or perhaps, naive." Yelan's lips curled into a faint, sickly smile, her voice quivering ever so slightly. "Your Highness, forgive my condition. Travel has taken its toll. I can barely stand." Lang's eyes flickered with scorn, yet he did not dismiss her. He thrived on the fear and respect of those around him, and her feigned frailty made the predator curious. "It seems your strength is waning, Snake," he said, his tone mocking. "Perhaps you should accept that your influence ends here, with the Emperor too weak to govern and myself, the Crown Prince, in control." The Emperor's frail hand lifted, trembling, and yet there was a quiet authority in the gesture that the room could not ignore. "Yelan," he whispered, voice barely audible, yet cutting through the tension like a blade, "leave no one alive." Time seemed to stretch. Lang's smile faltered as the weight of the Emperor's command hung in the air. Yelan's body, previously weak and trembling, became a coiled force of precision and lethal intent. Her hand moved to the hidden blade beneath her robes, a glint of steel catching the flickering candlelight, and suddenly, the sickly woman was gone, replaced by a storm of controlled violence. Lang drew his sword, realizing only too late that he had misjudged her. Yelan moved with the grace and speed of a striking serpent. Every step was calculated, every movement precise. She struck first at the nearest guard, a clean motion, silent and fatal. His body crumpled without a sound, a shadow disappearing into the darkness. Prince Lang lunged, his blade aimed at her, but Yelan anticipated every move. She sidestepped, twisting with a predator's elegance, and drove her hidden blade into the side of his torso. The blade pierced armor and flesh alike, and Lang staggered, his breath escaping in a hiss. The hall erupted into chaos. Guards rushed forward, swords drawn, but Yelan was everywhere at once. A blur of motion, her blade singing a deadly rhythm, each strike precise, each target neutralized before it could react. She was no longer merely a strategist, she was the executioner the Emperor had commanded, the force that could alter the course of the capital in a heartbeat. From the shadows, Commander Gao and Li Jun emerged. Gao, silent and deadly as ever, moved through the hall with practiced ease, taking down the remaining guards with a combination of steel and subtle trickery. Li Jun, steady despite his youth, drew his bow, releasing arrows with deadly accuracy, each one striking with precision that made even seasoned guards falter. Lang's desperation grew with each passing moment. He lashed out, fury and fear entwined, but he was surrounded, trapped by those he had underestimated. Yelan moved like water, fluid and unstoppable, and every strike brought them closer to the inevitable. The Crown Prince fell at last, his body collapsing to the ground, the life that had burned with ambition extinguished. The remaining guards, leaderless and stunned, surrendered almost without resistance. Silence settled over the hall, heavy, suffocating, yet victorious. Yelan lowered her blade, breathing steady despite the adrenaline that still thrummed in her veins. Her gaze swept over the room, the Emperor, alive though frail, Consort Lan, relieved yet wary, Prince Jian, eyes shining with quiet awe and respect. Gao and Jun flanked her, ready but restrained, knowing the mission was complete. The Emperor's frail hand reached for hers, and though he could barely speak, the words were clear. "You, elder sister, saved us all." Emotion welled within Yelan, a rare mix of pride, sorrow, and relief. She had acted not for glory, not for vengeance, but for the lives of those who could not fight for themselves. And in that moment, all the years of struggle, betrayal, and loss coalesced into clarity. She had fulfilled her purpose. Jun approached, bow in hand, and Yelan placed a hand on his shoulder. You acted well, June, she said softly. Today, you learned not just to strike, but to see the board, to anticipate, to protect. Never forget that power lies as much in foresight as in action. Commander Gao nodded, his silent approval conveying more than words could. The Emperor's command was clear, and we executed it, he said, voice steady. The threat is removed, for now. Yelan's eyes met the Emperor's. For now, she echoed. There would always be another challenge, another power to confront, but the first and most dangerous had been neutralized. As dawn broke over the capital, light spilling into the hall and glinting off polished marble, Yelan Huai stood among the aftermath of her execution. The crown prince was gone, the guards neutralized, and the imperial line secured. But more than that, she had proven, to herself and the world, that strategy and decisiveness, combined with unwavering resolve, could topple even the most dangerous of ambitions. And as she looked at her children, her allies, and the Emperor himself, she understood, the game was far from over, but the first victory had been claimed. And it had been hers. The capital, once a city of chaos, now breathed a fragile calm. The echoes of swords, the tension of conspiracies, and the shadows of betrayal had dissipated like mist in the morning sun. Yet beneath the surface, the currents of power had shifted irreversibly. The crown prince was dead, his supporters scattered, and the court trembled under the weight of newfound uncertainty. In the imperial hall, the emperor sat more upright than before, though his frail frame betrayed the toll of illness. His eyes, however, retained the sharpness of a mind unbroken. Beside him stood Consort Lan, her composure serene yet protective, and Prince Jian, tense yet resolute, the first heir now able to claim authority under the watchful eyes of loyal ministers. Yelan Huai entered the hall, her steps deliberate, her presence commanding even in the subdued light of dawn. She had returned to the capital not just as a strategist or survivor, but as a force that had altered the balance of power. Every eye in the room followed her, some with respect, others with awe, and a few with cautious suspicion. The emperor gestured toward her, his voice soft yet carrying the weight of imperial command. Yelan, you have done more than survive. You have safeguarded the throne, preserved the empire, and acted with wisdom and decisiveness that surpasses most ministers. For that, I entrust you with a responsibility unlike any before. A hush fell over the hall. Courtiers exchanged astonished glances. It was unprecedented for a woman to receive such recognition, let alone a title granting authority over both civil and military matters. Yelan inclined her head respectfully, understanding the gravity of the moment. I bestow upon you, the emperor continued, the title of Regent Grand Princess. You will serve as the guardian of the realm, guiding Prince Jian as he ascends. Your counsel, your vigilance, and your judgment will shape the future of this empire. Yelan's chest tightened with a mix of pride and solemnity. She had sought no personal glory, yet the weight of responsibility settled over her shoulders like a mantle forged in fire. Your Majesty, she said, voice steady and respectful, I accept this charge. I will serve with loyalty, wisdom, and unwavering resolve. The empire's safety will be my foremost duty, above all else. The emperor's gaze softened. And your family, they shall be secure under this new order. Lian Wei, despite the trials and misunderstandings, has proven his loyalty beyond measure. He shall serve as grand tutor, guiding the young prince in matters of state, as he has guided you through trials you faced together. Yelan allowed herself a faint smile. The reconciliation with Lian Wei, though unspoken in that moment, was a victory of a different kind, one of trust regained, of shared purpose restored. Prince Jian stepped forward, his voice firm yet respectful. Mother Yelan, the realm owes you more than gratitude. Your guidance will be indispensable as I learn to navigate the burdens of the throne. I will not forget the lives you preserved and the stability you restored. Yelan's eyes softened at his words. Despite his youth, Prince Jian carried the spark of leadership, measured, thoughtful, and unafraid to act when necessary. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. Prince Jian, remember that the weight of a crown is not merely in commanding others, but in understanding when to act, when to observe, and when to protect those who cannot protect themselves. That is true leadership. In the private chambers, the emperor drew Yelan closer, his frailty accentuating the poignancy of the moment. You were always more than a daughter of the Huai family, he whispered, voice cracking slightly. You were my elder sister in courage and in heart. Remember this, always. Tears pricked at Yelan's eyes, not of sorrow alone but of deep, abiding respect and affection. She bowed, pressing her forehead lightly against his hand. I will carry your trust, always, Your Majesty. Your wisdom and guidance will remain my compass. As the emperor withdrew to rest, Prince Jian took up his position as the new crown prince, the court now settling into a tense but stable order. Consort Lan, elevated to Empress Dowager, moved with quiet authority, ensuring that the transition remained orderly and respected. Yelan Huai, Regent Grand Princess, oversaw the consolidation of loyalty among ministers, military officers, and nobles alike. Every move, every decree, every appointment was measured to stabilize the empire while preserving the delicate balance she had fought so fiercely to maintain. Lian Wei approached quietly, his expression a mix of relief and admiration. You have done what none could have imagined, Yelan. The empire stands because of you. Yelan regarded him with calm authority, her gaze steady yet warm. We did what was necessary, Wei. Power is never a solitary endeavor. It is shared, shaped, and defended. Today, we have ensured that the future will be safer for our children, and for those who depend on this realm. The court, now stabilized, became a reflection of her influence. Ministers deferred to her counsel, generals sought her guidance, and even those who had doubted her found themselves silently acknowledging the force she had become. Yelan Huai was no longer merely a strategist, mother, or survivor. She was the linchpin of the empire, a presence both feared and respected, commanding with the precision of a blade and the wisdom of decades. And in the quiet moments that followed the ceremonial proceedings, as the sun dipped low over the capital, Yelan allowed herself a private reflection. She had survived betrayal, loss, and heartbreak. She had reclaimed her life, protected her children, and safeguarded the empire itself. Yet the true triumph lay not in power alone, but in the trust she had earned, the trust of the emperor, of Prince Jian, of her family, and of those whose lives she had saved. Yelan Huai, Regent Grand Princess, had fulfilled her promise. And though the path ahead would remain fraught with challenges, she had proven that courage, wisdom, and unwavering resolve could shape the destiny of an empire. The palace was calm for the first time in years, a rare tranquility that felt almost foreign to Yelan Huai. The empire had settled into a delicate rhythm under Prince Jian's guidance, with the emperor having passed quietly in his sleep weeks prior, leaving behind a legacy carefully preserved by those who had acted with wisdom, courage, and loyalty. Consort Lan, now Empress Dowager, maintained order with quiet authority, and the court moved with the measured grace of a well-tended machine. Yelan, Regent Grand Princess, spent her days attending to matters of state with the same precision she had always applied, yet her evenings were reserved for her family. Li Jun had grown into a capable young man, balancing his mother's teachings with his own moral compass, while Li Mei had adapted to her new position as a young noblewoman with poise and intelligence, her own ambitions guided by Yelan's counsel. And Lian Wei he moved through these halls with a newfound humility, a quiet reverence for the woman who had not only survived the worst of human treachery but had risen above it with strength and wisdom that had reshaped the empire itself. He approached her one evening, holding a small, folded document in his hands, a marriage certificate, newly signed, a symbol of his desire to rejoin their lives not as a subordinate or distant husband, but as a partner in every sense. You have made me wait long enough, he said, his voice low and earnest, a shadow of nervousness flickering across his usually composed face. I've been wrong before, but I want to be right now. Will you let me be yours again? Officially. As your male consort, if you insist. Yelan raised an eyebrow, a faint smile playing at the corners of her lips. She allowed a pause, letting the weight of the moment settle. Male consort, huh? A title of humility, or perhaps humor? Both, Lian Wei said with a small, self-deprecating bow, the gesture genuine. I'll be the male consort, the husband, the partner, whatever you wish. I only ask that you let me walk beside you again, not behind you. Yelan considered him carefully. The years of betrayal, of distance, and of unresolved tension had left scars, yet they were tempered by respect, admiration, and a bond forged through the fires of shared danger. She folded the certificate slowly, a deliberate act that mirrored her measured nature. Very well, she said finally, voice calm, almost teasing. You may be my male consort. But know this, you will earn every word of that title. You will act with loyalty, with courage, and with unwavering commitment. Any failure, any lapse, and you will answer to me first. Lian Wei's smile, warm and relieved, was the first genuine expression of joy she had seen in him in years. I will, he promised, voice steady. You have my word, as always. From that day forward, their partnership transformed the palace in subtle ways. Where Yelan led with decisiveness, Lian Wei offered balanced counsel tempered by experience, insight informed by patience. Together, they guided Prince Jian, ensuring that the empire remained stable while nurturing the next generation. But beyond politics, beyond strategy, they rebuilt the personal bond that had been fractured by years of duty, betrayal, and survival. Even in quieter moments, Yelan found herself observing Lian Wei with a mix of amusement and affection. There was a soft humor in his earnest attempts to please her, in his occasional clumsiness when trying to anticipate her needs, in the small ways he adapted to her unyielding presence. And in response, she allowed herself laughter, tenderness, and the rare vulnerability that only family and love could foster. One evening, long after the sun had dipped below the palace walls and the city had quieted, Yelan and Lian Wei sat together on the veranda overlooking the gardens. Lanterns swayed gently in the evening breeze, casting pools of golden light over the stone paths, over the trees that had been meticulously tended, over the still waters of the reflecting ponds. "You know," Lian Wei said quietly, his gaze fixed on her profile, "I've always loved you. From the first moment I saw you, even that day, when I stood by as your parents were executed." Yelan's breath caught, not from anger or regret, but from the raw sincerity in his words. She had always suspected, had always known, yet hearing it aloud the truth laid bare stirred something deep within her. "I know," she said softly, turning her gaze toward him. "I've known, Wei. And, perhaps that is why we survived. Because love, even unspoken, can guide actions more than any fear or ambition ever could." They sat in silence, letting the weight of years, of trials endured, and of victories won settle around them. For the first time, Yelan felt a sense of completion, not the end of struggle, for power and life were never truly without challenge, but the end of a chapter, the realization that her family, her children, and her life had found balance and strength. Weeks later, as they walked together through the gardens, the weight of the empire momentarily lifted from their shoulders. Lian Wei turned to her with a mischievous glint. "I suppose I really am your male consort now. Should I kneel, bow, or just keep fetching tea?" Yelan laughed, a full, unguarded sound. "You may fetch tea, but only if you do it properly." In time, Yelan Huai passed peacefully, surrounded by her children, by Lian Wei, and by the memory of an empire she had protected and shaped. Her life had been one of danger, betrayal, and loss, yet it was also one of triumph, love, and enduring legacy. The next year, Lian Wei followed her, reuniting with her in death, leaving behind a tale whispered through the empire, a tale of a woman who had defied destiny, wielded power with wisdom, and loved with unwavering resolve. And so the Huai family, bound by blood, loyalty, and choice, endured. Their story became legend, a testament to courage, intellect, and the relentless pursuit of justice in a world that often demanded ruthlessness to survive. Yelan Huai, the regent grand princess, lived and loved on her own terms, leaving behind a legacy that no shadow of betrayal could ever diminish.